Hi, I'm Lena, and welcome to Super Data JP, the channel where we turn Japan's real estate and cost of living numbers into answers you can actually use. Every video here is built on verified government data, not opinions, and not guesses. Whether you're planning to invest, relocate, or just curious what life in Japan really costs, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's numbers.
You can still buy a Japanese house for 1 yen. We covered that in an earlier video, and it genuinely happens. What almost nobody asks, in any of the comments or the headlines, is the question that actually decides whether the whole thing makes sense. What does it cost to make that house livable? That earlier video on Japan's Akiya, or vacant houses, became one of our most watched, and the same follow-up question showed up over and over in the comments, from people genuinely weighing a purchase. So this is the direct sequel, the actual renovation cost breakdown, tier by tier, start to finish. This is for anyone seriously considering an Akiya purchase, and for anyone who's only seen the viral headline price and quietly assumed that number was the whole story, because it almost never is once you actually start pricing out the work. Quick recap of where we left off. The median listed price on Japan's Akiya banks runs about 4.50 million yen, with some listings genuinely priced as low as 1 yen. That part of the story checks out completely. We also showed the national average renovation cost, 12.20 million yen, up sharply from 7.89 million yen back in 2009. But that figure is a blended average across every renovated home in Japan, condos, newer houses, everything, not what an actual Akiya renovation specifically looks like. So let's break the real number down properly, tier by tier, from the cheapest realistic fix-up to the full traditional farmhouse restoration, starting with the renovation most buyers actually end up doing. A basic Akiya renovation, the standard entry point, runs 2 million yen to 6 million yen. That tier covers plumbing, electrical rewiring, and updating the kitchen and bathroom, plus minor structural patch-up work. What it doesn't cover, the roof, the foundation, or bringing the building up to current earthquake standards. Add those three in, the roof, the foundation, the seismic work most buyers eventually need anyway, and the total changes fast, sometimes doubling or tripling the number a listing agent first quoted. A full renovation that includes seismic reinforcement and proper insulation regularly clears 10 million yen, and on older or larger properties it isn't unusual for that number to go well beyond it. That's not really optional for most Akiya, either. Over 60% of Japan's vacant houses predate the June 1981 earthquake code overhaul, so seismic work is usually baked into the project, not an upgrade you can quietly skip. Seismic reinforcement alone averages roughly 1.2 million yen to 1.5 million yen for a typical wooden house, based on Japanese reform industry contractor data. Depending on exactly what a structural inspection turns up, individual jobs range from about 250,000 yen up to 2 million yen or more, and foundation or soil issues can push it higher still, all before you've touched anything cosmetic. And all of that is still the ordinary Akiya category. Traditional farmhouses, known as Kominka, are a genuinely different project, older, larger, and built with techniques that most modern contractors simply don't practice anymore. Purchase prices for a Kominka typically run 0.5 million yen to 20 million yen, and counterintuitively, that's often the cheapest part of the entire project. A full gut renovation of a mid-size Kominka, roughly 100 to 200 square meters, commonly runs 10 million yen to 30 million yen on its own. Priced per-tsubo, that works out to roughly 27.50 thousand yen to 500,000 yen per-tsubo for a proper restoration, territory that starts to genuinely overlap with new construction pricing. Roughly where that money goes, roof rehatching or retiling runs 3 million yen to 10 million yen, rewiring 500,000 yen to 2 million yen, and modern plumbing 2 million yen to 5 million yen, each its own line item on top of the structural work. Location changes everything, too. High-demand resort areas like Niseko and Hakuba push Kominka restoration to 700,000 yen to 900,000 yen per-tsubo, nearly double the standard countryside rate. Skilled labor is scarcer in those areas, finishes trend upscale to match international buyers, and land itself is priced like a resort market, not a depopulating rural one, the same forces that shape real estate prices across Japan's ski towns generally, from Niseko down to Nozawa Onsen. Add it all up and a genuine Kominka restoration typically lands at 15 million yen to 30 million yen all in, purchase price included, the true cost of the dream, not the listing photo. Now the part almost nobody plans for, cost overruns of 20 to 40% are the norm on these projects, not the rare exception buyers assume they'll avoid. Old houses hide their problems well. Rotted structural beams, termite damage, and outdated wiring buried behind beautiful plaster walls routinely surface only after demolition actually begins, when walking away cheaply is no longer really an option. The practical rule experienced contractors actually use: budget 130 to 150% of whatever your initial quote says, before you sign a single contract. Run the basic tier math on that median 4.50 million yen listing plus a 6 million yen renovation, and you're already well past the blended national average figure we quoted in the original video, and that's before factoring in any overrun at all. There is real relief available, though, and one major piece of it is brand new this year. Japan's 2026 energy efficiency renovation subsidy, backed by a 30 billion yen government budget, now caps out at 1.0 million yen per house, up from just 600,000 yen the year before. It covers floor, wall, and ceiling insulation work specifically, and it generally applies to homes built on or before the end of 2016, a cutoff that describes most Akiya on the market by definition. Separate municipal seismic reinforcement subsidies, the ones we covered in the original video, still stack on top of this national program, worth checking both before you finalize a renovation budget, not after the contract is already signed. One catch that's specific to foreign buyers: renovation financing is genuinely hard to secure without permanent residency, so most Akiya purchases and renovations end up funded largely, or entirely, in cash, which makes the overrun math above even more important to get right up front. For Kominka specifically, add a labor constraint on top of the budget one. Proper restoration needs Mayadeku, master carpenters trained in traditional joinery, and they're a genuinely shrinking trade, frequently booked years in advance, even for buyers willing to pay a premium. The single most common mistake buyers make is treating the listing price as the budget. It's closer to the deposit on a much larger, much less predictable project that unfolds over months, sometimes years, not weeks. Before buying, get an independent structural inspection, get a written quote from the contractor who will actually do the work rather than a rough estimate from the listing agent, and apply for any subsidy before renovation starts. Most programs flatly refuse to pay retroactively. A 1 yen house was never really about the 1 yen. It's about whether the honestly budgeted total, purchase, renovation, overrun buffer, and all, still makes sense for what you end up with, and for most buyers who plan properly, it still genuinely can. Subscribe for more data-driven breakdowns of living and investing in Japan, and let us know what part of the Akiya process, from financing to permits to finding a contractor, you want us to cover next.
And that's today's breakdown. If you're serious about real estate or moving to Japan, research like this is exactly what separates a smart decision from an expensive mistake. Subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive, and drop a comment if there's a city or word you want us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.